Iko Nini. So the BBC documentary inaitwa Blood Parliament bado ina trend hapa Kenya, and the interesting thing about it is how politicians are coming out to show us that either they don't respect us ama they think that we are stupid. It's one of the two. And tunaanza na umadha anaitwa Millie Odhiambo. Of course Millie Odhiambo waga like one of those politicians ile watu wengi wanasemaga like she is an intellectual, unajua, like she's someone who knows what's going on. And ukimsikiza kibonga ni ka alikuwa na bonga design ni kama Kenyans have moved on from June 25th, which Kenyans have not. Unajua, it's a very big lie. The broad-based government has moved on, but Kenyans are still stuck on that. That's why the names zimekuwa zikikama hapa kina Kasongo, Must Go, El Chapo, hizo zote zinakam because of June 25th. Wase hawajai move on. Watu bado wako as angry as they were last year. The only difference ni saa hizi tunajua how far the government iko willing kugo ikikam to story na kudedisha watu, and that's the reason why watu walienda hapo wametulia. But to say that Kenyans had already started healing and a documentary imeturudisha hapo ni to be very dishonest. But wacha tusikize huyu mother.
These people, I don't know what their intention is. Their intention could be fuel more harm and whatever. I don't know what their intention is. But from the young people that have spoken, it has actually created more anger. We are taking them back to the path that they would rather not walk again. But they are walking it. And we don't know at what point somebody else will fuel it again. You can't stop the media. Somebody else will fuel that anger again. And so for us to deal with it, let this parliament take that mandate to deal.
So mechiki hapo bila nasema ni tumerudishwa back na hii documentary. I don't think hii documentary imerudisha mtu anywhere. This has been public information. Public sentiments zimekuwa ikikam to hii story, watu wamekuwa wamejam and watu bado wamekasirika till now. But here it's where it gets interesting because somehow mother anai move from a fight for the people to a fight for parliamentarians and their pockets. Najua usiwahi danganyika. The reason why Kenya tunashindaga like every one step committees, because these committees come with very good sitting allowances. I think zinakuwaga around 15,000 shillings per sitting allowance, and 15,000 shillings is a lot of money in any part of this world. 15,000 shillings is at least $100. If you can get $100 on top of your salary just to sit down somewhere for 2 or 3 hours, you take it. Najua. So wacha tumsikize.
When we had post-election violence, Mr. Speaker, I was lucky to be in this parliament. I think we're with you in that parliament. Mr. Speaker, we set up a select committee. We walked all over this country. And because as human beings, we have a nature to forget. When we thought we had moved on, I remember in one case, we met a woman whose husband's head had been decapitated. She went to her home with the husband's head. And we are dealing with people who are angry, people who are depressed. And going there, Mr. Speaker, I remember today when I was speaking in Parliament, I broke down and cried. Not because of me, but because of what we had. And we think we are moving on, but there are many young people who have not necessarily moved on.
So that's the only honest part of history. There are very many young people who have not moved on. And I would not say there are many young people. I'd say that anyone who was involved in the protest last year has not moved on. Yes, there have been a few things ile gava inafanya kutufurahisha in quotes, kama kuclaim that they're not going to increase taxes this year. They've said that. Because Kenya has never had a tax collection problem. Kenya has had a corruption problem. Kuna ile story nile mention ya kuna msee inasemekana alibuy apartment and the apartment is worth like $3 million. Like, where did this money come from? And you'll find it's a government official. And we've come to normalize corruption design ingine. When you question that, unasikia msee mmoja anakuambia, you know, business people have money. Which business is this you're doing? For a business to thrive, there needs to be a population that has good spending power. A lot of Kenyans don't have good spending power. You know why? Because there are no jobs. People are chilling. This is the reason why you can call a political rally on any day and itajaa. When uku inje, like if you have something to do, you not go. Like on a random Tuesday afternoon, nataka nikuwe kwa some political rally nikisikiza politician. What for? Nacheki, because I have something to do. But when you have nothing to do, you'll show up there. So people don't have spending power. For someone to claim that a secretive Kenyan has done all this business while being a full-time politician and part-time businessman, okay, but wacha to go back to mother. Sasa uone the reason hii story yote alikame up nayo haikuwa ati juu ya kututetea, ni kutetea Ruto na kuonyesha Ruto anamtetea, alafu in the process if kama Ruto anaweza toa kitu pia hakuna ubaya, kusidanganyike. Hizi stories zote kutakuwa na the committee that's going to be formed. The committee will be public, but in private the committee will always report to Samoei.
Mr. Speaker, personally I would appeal, and I don't want to sit in that committee, but I would appeal that we set up a select committee.
Hii kitu ya kwamba I don't want to sit in that committee ni story. And yes, unaweza pata hata sit in the committee, but the fact that she proposes it, ama she proposed it, if it ends up working, you know, Samoei can end up kucheza kama yeye. Because one thing that I've come to realize, and I think nilibonga juu yake kwa watu wajacheki, nilibonga juu ya ODM and the way that ODM right now they've become like such big like supporters of impunity that it's actually sad to see. Ndio raya ziko zinajitetea for a very long time without being exposed. Wala zinajitetea that zina stand for human rights and anti-police brutality and anti-all this. As soon as mlango ya gava ilifunguliwa kidogo,
to deal with this issue that stemmed not necessarily the finance bill, but the after effect of that finance bill. Mr. Speaker, I humbly agree that we deal with this soberly, and I'd want to discourage us from going through a process which we think may be politically correct, but does not necessarily move us forward as a country.
Yes, so kulikuwa na mother, so na go through a few of the reactions. So umecheki hapo proposition ni we should form a committee, and as you know, as I told you, these committees don't come for free. This is just another burden on the taxpayer. Kenya is one of the few countries where politicians actually get a salary and they still get a sitting allowance. Like every time unaonaga that politician in parliament spewing nonsense, they've actually been paid extra money to do that. Acheki. So kulikuwa na hiyo. Alafu sasa kulikuwa na ingine pia. Najua parliament imejaa mafala kibao na imejaa ujinga kibao. So kuna mse ule alikuwa so heartless. Ikikam to hizi stories za Gen Zs and the protests that utachikivila dismiss the deaths, that watu dedi alafu watu wana move on. Unajua kwani hakuna kitu special hapa, watu dedi na watu wana move on. And this is a narrative that a lot of Kenyans pia waga tumesubscribe to. Tumekam kuwa told that unnecessary death ni normal, that waga mtu akidedi tuko zile that's why unaonaga tuna downplay one death, lazima zikuwe mob. Like mse moja akidedishwa for something that they were not supposed to be, utachiki zizi wacha tuongeza watu watatu hivi, wacha tu exaggerate the numbers, and every time we exaggerate numbers we end up making the government propaganda machine ibaki imeshinda. So wacha tusikize buda vile kwa nabonga juu ya deaths na kublame BBC.
BBC World Service has attended to this matter in a way that also looked at the Kenyan society or African society as something that discriminatory, sort of, if I may say so.
Discriminatory. So hii discriminatory, I think alikuwa anatry kumaanisha discriminatory. I don't think any part of the BBC documentary ilituonyesha kama discriminatory. The BBC Nini just showed us how much we disregard human life, and apart from that, how far the executive is willing to go just to keep things executive friendly. That's all hii kitu ilionyesha, because hizi stories are say the fact that it took a BBC documentary for us to remember that whatever happened last year should not have happened. Like all those deaths were necessary. Arrest people, wapeleke kotini. Like jela ni serious kabisa. And for you to just decide that mse anasimama tu mbele ya crowd alafu anaanza tu kushoot directly, that was so dangerous, because hizo bullet pia zilikuwa na probability ya kuhata mtu yuko hapo na zigonge mse yuko kwa ofisi huko. Kwa hizo mabuilding waga ziko around ziko around Nyayo House na vitu kama hizo. Okay, si Nyayo House but you get the picture, like any building hapo around hapo Parliament Road. So sikia ufala, wacha tu blame BBC.
Honorable Speaker, it looked like our media stations also picked it up without questioning how BBC World Service aired the story. It happens world over. People are killed, our people are killed, we sympathize, we moved on. Even world over. Remember, there was the same issue or similar in Capitol Hill. BBC World Service never took the opportunity to say something.
History ya Capitol Hill imekuwa ikinibamba sana because kuna vile wase wengi wamekuwa inatumika kama justification ya hii kitu will happen Kenya and the amount of violence that was meted out hapa Kenya. The first thing is ikikam to Capitol Hill hakukuwa na anyone ule alikuwa na amekaa chini alafu ana aim at the protesters. Nacheki, the protesters eventually walikuwa prosecuted and some were jailed and that's what like huko wanaitanga ni January 6th. Yes, wanaitanga January 6th. So hizo the January 6th United States Capitol attack, and from hiyo story yote kulikuwa na one rioter who was killed by gunshot, alafu another one alidie from drug overdose, alafu kuna two rally goers who died from natural causes. Alafu ikikam to hii, this was one of the reasons why, another reason why Trump alikuwa like kuna watu wengi walikuwa wanasema that Trump was not supposed to run for office ever again because he ilikuwa like close to treason. Nacheki, and Trump of course ikikam to story zake anachukuliwa kama anachukuliwa kama msee moja ule like ana save white America. Unajua kuna nikushusha sikia versions mingi za ama fala wa deep walikuambia kubonga juu ya race ni kuwa na victim mentality. Najua hiyo ujinga hiyo nishaisikia mara mingi sana, but everywhere I go mukumbukaga that I'm a black man living in a white man's world, and this is not about victim mentality, this is about situational awareness. Niza kuambia juu an African called Amadou Diallo, ule yako anajua he's a black man in America, kuna tembea huko na hoodie kama ingiza mikono hivi, makarawa kamwambia toa mikono. By time alikuwa anatoa hivi, I think alikuwa na drink alikuwa na drink. By time alikuwa anaitoa hivi alikuwa shot 41 times. Lazima ujue hii ngozi, lazima ukuwe rada nayo, sikuwe mjinga, sikuwe umeishi hata kama unaishi states na si tuko hapa Kenya, sikuwe umefika level umesikiza wasee wakakudanganya that wewe na mzungu mko same. Ile country ko built strictly on race. Race ndio the foundation of that country, and that's why that's the one country where utapata watu wanaitwa African American, na huwezi sikia African British ama African French ama African, zinakuwaga Pogba ni French, nani tena Ian Wright ni English, kunaga hizo stories za African whatever, but pale race waga important sana. So since BBC hawaku report on this, wacha tuende kwa BBC. So BBC on 5th of January 2024 walikuwa na article, the day that still divides America 3 years on. Alafu so this is an article to show that the BBC still reported on what happened in America. So ilikuwa ni Kayla Epstein kwa Americans watched in horror on January 6, 2021 as rioters smashed through barricades and ransacked the US Capitol with the goal of stopping the certification of Joe Biden's election. As Trump supporters stalked the halls of Congress and lawyers fled to safe rooms in fear, the country seemed united in disgust. Yes, alafu na cheki hii ni very different from the Kenyan situation, because with this one you had rioters who are trying to stop like hakukuwa na any form of rigging that had happened, but these people wanted to stop from being certified Biden. Hii situation ya Kenya ilikuwa people fighting for like a bill that was going to overtax them. I know our taxes go to just fund Gucci shoes and Torino shirts. Najua kama hujawacha ile video nilidujia shirt ya Murkomen amevaa shirt ya $1,500. Like kuna ujinga zingine zinakuaga kwa hii nchi. Alafu unapata kifala kiko hapo imeniandikia kwa comments, mwafu nafikiria mtu atakuwa na $1 billion na avae shati ya 1500. Wewe angalia zile t-shirts Elon Musk huvaa, hizo ni vitu za Walmart kaa hii. Okay, vitu wagazani katsia. So history ya nini ya Trump ilikuwa covered vizuri kabisa, so it's not like the BBC did not cover this was covered everywhere worldwide. So now back to Kenya. You have such people wanatuambia that the BBC haikucover this. The BBC is what? The BBC is taxpayer funded in the UK, and I think if you didn't watch the feature ile back in we'll do something about that, and I was trying to explain how the BBC is funded, where when you're watching the BBC, the first thing inakuulizaga ni have you paid for your license? And I was relating that with KBC, because when the British left, walituachia KBC, and with KBC you had to pay for a license. So every time kuna buy TV, there used to be an extra amount of money you'd pay that was a license to KBC. That stopped, and I feel like that needs to come back. Kuna watu hata ni understand. The only reason why right now it would not work is because it would go into some individual's pocket. But one day when we have a functioning government and people who care about this country, we will need that extra 100 shillings ama 200 shillings that used to go to KBC ibaki imeenda hapo, alafu ikuwe accounted for, isaidie ku offset debt za KBC, na apart from that ku take KBC to the level that KBC can be. If you watch like BBC originals, kama wewe ni mtu una watch kitu kama Black Mirror on Netflix, you need to know that's a BBC original. Ask yourself, what's the equivalent of that on KBC? KBC basically after kina vioja mahakamani, it just died, najua. But now ile time KBC ilikuwa ina dead, other people ended up springing up, and all of the people that sprang up around that time ilikuwa ni KJ. Na KJ is someone that I'm really looking forward to one day sitting with him, because mse namjua from other circles, na pia I think hata weko tunabonga na mkurugenzi pia alibongaga juu interactions na yeye. So he's someone who come to the creative industry like he's always been up there, and for us to see him become what he's become nowadays, where yusemaga vitu zingine mpaka unashindwa umse iko serious, kwani Ruto? Okay, wacha tusikie kile KJ alisema, cause afanya na doubt, kwani Ruto yufanyiaga watu nini? You are threatened before mpaka inabidi lazima wamtetee ama inakuagaje? Cause kumbuka when the June 18th protests happened, KJ alitokeaga akasema that kuna protests zile happen, yeye ni graphic designer, anajua kuedit photos, na hiyo ilikuwa ni Photoshop. By time iko ina happen on the 25th, mpaka baadaye kuna time like vitu zilikuwa hard sana kwake masaiza dago. So wacha tusikize kila alisema this time, because this time ningemwambia just sit this one out. Najua kina Dindi ama ni Dede Nyoro wame sit this one out, just sit it out, you don't have to talk.
And we understand, Mr. Speaker, even in media, that the BBC is funded by taxpayers' money in Britain, meaning that BBC is funded to push the foreign agenda of the British people internationally, Mr. Speaker. And so we must know, is BBC speaking as a mouthpiece of the government and the people of Britain? Or what is it that the BBC is doing? Could it be an attempt to untwist this country so that they can rescind on the rider that we put on their training of the Batuk units in Kenya, Mr. Speaker?
Sorry, the Batuk, if you can talk about that. Batuk, of course, now the stories are like the atrocities that they've did up in Kenya. That's a very big issue. That's an issue that needs to be followed up. And I think this is an issue that can either be prosecuted under international law, ama sisi kama Wakenya wenyewe tunaweza end up tumeenda huko Brito. Unajua some of these watu wame study international law na is a prosecute. So that is true. We need to follow up on the atrocities committed by the British Army hapa Kenya. Yes? So so kuna hiyo. But to say that hii article yote my story yote ilikuwa just because the British are trying to push some sort of agenda against us, this has nothing to do with the British. Watu walidedishwa. This is a news report on what happened. It's not what should happen. Because ingekuwa like the British wanasema this is what should happen, alafu ilikuwa BBC, alafu kitu fani ni masikio yangu inakuwa very good with accents. Your accent ilikuwa, that was a Kenyan with very good English. Ndio alikuwa na report, alikuwa the voice. Kasivo, I need to check that out. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that didn't sound to me like some white person. Hiyo ilikuwa ina sound kama just a good, either an African with very, in quotes, good English, hana some whatever. So this has nothing to do with the British. Alafu ilikuwa BBC Africa. Hii hata ikuwa BBC World Service vile hasi wanashinda wakisema. So hii kitu ili happen. And I still go back to what does Ruto have on these people? These are stories that I have na KJ. Because kuna vitu zingine ziliosemaga tu mpaka nashinda like say, is this the same guy who used to joke about akina Kamodho? Najua kuna vitu alikuwa anafanyaga zile akina Kihika. Nakumbuka kama ushinda kwa kasha meet na Susan Kihika. Kama hiyo time Susan Kihika alikuwa US wajuagi vile vitu zilikuwa zinaenda. But yes, so wacha tusikie vile umse aliendelea kuchoma picha.
Mr. Speaker, and perpetuate a history of extractive economy, oppressive economy, and exploitative economy in a very unfair trade balance between Kenya and the UK. Mr. Speaker, even as we debate this matter, it is not lost to us that yes, there were unfavorable events that took place in the time and the lead up to the finance bill.
So, we'll go back to hii. Kuna hii story moja tumekuwa tukisema, of course, stories za trade. Africa inakuwaga treated unfairly. Yes, that's the truth. We are an importing economy. Like all over Africa, we just import. We rarely export. We come to like our interactions with countries like akina China. We don't ask to learn. Sisi tunataka tu kufanyiwa. So kuna shida hizo. But the biggest problem tuko nayo, even with our importing culture, kuna the aspect of corruption. Corruption is our biggest disease. Anything else ni unajua ni ku put paper cracks ama ni paper ni ku put wallpaper on top of wall cracks, whatever the phrase is. Hii story to say try to complicate. So there's that. And then another thing is the protests. As nimefanya nikaona, there's this quote nilicheki. The quote was by someone called Wendy Jade. So Wendy Jade alisema, an environment that is not safe to disagree in is not an environment focused on growth. It's an environment focused on control. What we see happening in parliament, where everyone just blabbers the same thing, that is an environment of control. The executive is controlling the legislative arm. And this is very sad to see. That's why in a situation where you have people like akina Sifuna saying very reasonable things, alafu napata mtu kama Alai anamuattack, cause everyone try to live kwa hiyo cocoon where we all agree on something. And this is not just a problem with the government, it's also a problem even with the Gen Z movement itself. The Gen Z movement pia may create an environment that is not safe to disagree in. And this is very dangerous. It happened with the US Democrats. Will come up na hiyo sort of attitude where we have to agree on everything, otherwise you are an enemy. Na kuna wasa wame pick up hiyo same attitude, and it's very dangerous because with this what ends up happening is it ends up helping the government. Najua when it becomes like CC, even as we are on one side, we can never disagree on strategy. That if we disagree, the majority of us can say that the minority have been paid off, and then this happens. So now you see what's happening in parliament. There's one person who's proposing that they need to start a committee. Super useless. Kuna mwingine anatuambia watu kufa alafu watu wana move on. Alafu sasa kuna KJ yule amekama up na stories za trade, and if you are to ask me, this has nothing to do with trade between Kenya and the UK, but it is what it is. So tutaendelea kucheki tuone what do you expect to happen as Prophet Habakkuk. I expect a committee is going to be formed, and watu wanaenda ku earn some really good sitting allowances. Iko Nini.